My name is Madison Hartley, head nurse, single mother, and the woman whose future mother-in-law erased her existence for 8 years. She destroyed the man I loved, wiped his memories clean, and stole him away from the twin daughters he never even knew existed. I'll never forget the moment he stood before the hospital board, looked his mother dead in the eye, and said, "You stole my life. You stole their father. You stole time we'll never get back." That's when everything unraveled, and the room fell completely silent. Before I share the rest of my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever had to fight for your family. Trust me, you're going to want to hear what happened next. The night shift at Asheville Children's Hospital had always been my sanctuary. In the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle whoosh of ventilators, I found a rhythm that kept the memories at bay. 8 years of practice had made me an expert at not thinking about him. Then everything shattered with 3 words from my colleague, Janet. "Foster's back, Caleb." My hands froze mid-chart notation. The pen slipped, leaving an ugly blue streak across the patient's temperature log. Janet kept talking. Something about a new neurosurgeon, something about his mother being admitted to the VIP wing, but her voice had become white noise. Caleb Foster. The name I'd trained myself not to think, not to whisper even in my dreams. The father of my daughters who'd vanished like morning mist the day after I'd told him about the pregnancy test. 2 pink lines that had changed everything. 2 pink lines that had driven him away. I forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The technique I taught anxious parents. "Which room?" I heard myself ask. "His mother's in 407. Loretta Foster, comatose after a stroke. He's different, though. There was some kind of accident years ago. A plane crash, they're saying. Memory issues." Memory issues? I almost laughed. How convenient. The elevator ride to the 4th floor took 17 seconds. I counted each one, my reflection in the steel doors showing a woman I barely recognized. Older, harder, wearing scrubs that had seen too many late nights. Madison Hartley, head nurse, single mother, survivor. Not the 26-year-old who'd once believed in forever. Room 407's door was ajar. Through the gap, I saw her first. Loretta Foster, the Southern aristocrat who'd once told me I'd never be good enough for her son. Tubes and wires made her look smaller, more human. Then my eyes shifted, and there he was. 8 years had carved new lines around his eyes, threaded silver through his dark hair. But the way he stood, slightly favoring his left leg, fingers drumming against his thigh when thinking, that was pure Caleb. He was studying his mother's chart with the same intensity he'd once reserved for my face in the morning light. "Dr. Foster?" I kept my voice professional, steady. "I'm Madison Hartley, head nurse for this unit." When he turned, his green eyes, Zoe's eyes, Maya's eyes, met mine without a flicker of recognition. "Ms. Hartley, thank you for taking care of my mother. I'm afraid I'm still getting familiar with the staff here. I've been away." Away. Such a simple word for 8 years of absence. 8 years of explaining to 2 little girls why they didn't have a daddy like other kids. 3 weeks passed in a careful dance of avoidance. I switched shifts when possible, delegated his mother's care when not. But hospitals are small worlds, and eventually the universe conspired against me. It was Maya who broke first. Of course it was Maya, my wild child, the one who climbed trees despite my warnings and asked questions I couldn't answer. She'd fallen from their jungle gym at school, nothing serious, just a gash on her forehead that needed stitches. But the school insisted on the ER, and the ER was overwhelmed, and somehow, she ended up in Trauma Bay 3 with Dr. Caleb Foster holding a suture kit. "Well, hello there, brave girl," he said, his voice gentle in that way I remembered, the way that used to make me feel safe. "What's your name?" "Maya Hartley," she announced, then added with 7-year-old importance, "I have a twin sister named Zoe, and my mom works here, and I'm not scared of needles." I watched from the doorway, my heart hammering against my ribs. He smiled, that crooked smile that had once undone me completely, and began cleaning the wound. "Your mom works here. She must be very proud of such a brave daughter." "She says we're her miracles." Maya chirped. Because she didn't think she'd ever have us. His hands paused for just a moment. Such a small hesitation, but I saw it. When he looked up, his eyes found mine across the room. Something flickered there. Confusion, maybe, or the ghost of a memory trying to surface. Miracles indeed, he murmured, returning to his work. That night, I found a note in my locker. Your daughter has your courage. She also has unusual green eyes for such dark hair. Recessive genes are fascinating, aren't they? CF. I crumpled the note, then smoothed it out, then crumpled it again. He was circling the truth like a shark sensing blood in the water. How long before he put the pieces together? How long before my carefully constructed world came crashing down? But it wasn't Caleb I should have been worried about. It was Loretta. She woke up on a Tuesday, her first words sharp as winter. Where is my son? When I entered her room for routine vitals, her eyes locked onto mine with predatory focus. Madison Hartley, I remember you. Mrs. Foster, how are you feeling? Like a woman who's been asleep too long. She studied me with these calculating eyes. You have children now, I hear. Twins. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. The Foster Foundation Gala was the social event of Asheville's medical community. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and enough pretense to choke on. As head nurse, my attendance was strongly encouraged, which meant mandatory if I wanted to keep my job. What they hadn't mentioned was that I'd be introducing the children's choir, which included Zoe and Maya. I stood backstage, adjusting Zoe's collar for the third time while Maya practiced her solo part under her breath. They looked so beautiful in their matching navy dresses, their dark hair pulled back to reveal those startling green eyes that grew more like their father's every day. You'll be perfect, I whispered, kissing each forehead. Mom, you're nervous, Zoe observed, always too perceptive for her age. Is it because of that doctor who fixed Maya's head? Before I could answer, the lights dimmed, and we were called to the stage. The spotlight was blinding, but not bright enough to hide what happened next. Halfway through the program, as Maya's clear voice filled the ballroom with amazing grace, I saw Caleb in the front row. His date, a polished blonde in designer red, whispered something in his ear, but his eyes never left the stage, never left Maya, never left Zoe. Then, as the last note faded and the applause thundered, he stood. The blonde, Rachel, I'd later learn, his fiancé and the Foster Foundation's legal counsel, stood with him, beaming as though she knew what was coming. Ladies and gentlemen, Caleb's voice carried across the room. Before we continue, I have an announcement. My legs turned to water. He was going to say it. He was going to claim them, right here, right now, in front of everyone. But instead, he turned to Rachel, dropped to one knee, and pulled out a ring that caught the light like captured stars. Rachel Bloom, will you marry me? The room erupted. Champagne glasses raised, cameras flashed. And in the chaos, I caught Zoe's hand as she stood frozen on stage, her eyes, his eyes, wide with something I had never seen before. Recognition of a betrayal she didn't understand. We left during the celebration, my girl's small hands in mine. In the parking lot, Maya asked in a small voice, Mom, why did that man keep staring at us? I don't know, baby, I lied, the words ash in my mouth. But Zoe said nothing. She just held my hand tighter, and I knew. Somehow, my eldest daughter knew. The truth has a way of recognizing itself, even in silence. The video was grainy, 8 years old, recorded by a security camera at a private psychiatric facility in Tennessee. I sat in the borrowed office of Nurse Patricia Chen, who'd worked there before retiring, watching Caleb, my Caleb, being led down a hallway in restraints, his eyes vacant, drugged. His mother signed the papers, Patricia whispered, though we were alone. Said he'd had a psychotic break, but I knew better. That boy was heartbroken, kept talking about a baby, about needing to get back to someone named Madison. My hands shook as she handed me a folder. Admission papers, treatment notes, prescription logs, enough psychotropics to erase a person, to rebuild them into someone else entirely. All signed by Loretta Foster and a Dr. Marcus Holt, who, Patricia noted, had received a generous donation to his research fund that same year. Why didn't anyone stop this? I asked, though I knew the answer. Money, power, the foster name. She said he'd gotten a girl pregnant. Some nurse said the family couldn't afford the scandal. I thought of Loretta lying in that hospital bed and felt rage so pure it burned. She'd stolen 8 years. She'd stolen my daughter's father. She'd stolen the life we might have had. When I confronted her that evening, she was sitting up in bed, looking more like her old self, imperious, untouchable. I wondered when you'd piece it together, she said, smoothing her hospital gown as though it were designer silk. You always were smarter than I gave you credit for. You destroyed him. You destroyed us. I saved him from you. Her voice was ice. A foster heir throwing away his future for a nobody nurse and her bastard children? I did what any mother would do. Zoe and Maya are your granddaughters. Their mistakes I've spent 8 years ensuring never come to light. She leaned forward, her eyes glittering. And if you breathe a word of this to Caleb, I'll make sure you lose them. Permanently. I have judges in my pocket, Madison. Social services. You're one phone call away from being declared an unfit mother. I left her room on unsteady legs, Patricia's folder hidden in my locker. The truth was a weapon I couldn't use, not without risking everything. But secrets, I was learning, have a way of revealing themselves. And Zoe, my brilliant, observant Zoe, had been watching. She'd been watching everything. The email appeared in Caleb's inbox on a Thursday afternoon, sent from a generic hospital account. Dr. Foster, I need to talk to you about something important. Please meet me in the children's garden at 3 p.m. A friend. I only learned about it later, after everything exploded. Zoe had watched me enter my password a dozen times, had memorized it with that steel trap mind of hers. She'd found the photo I kept hidden in my desk drawer, the only one I'd saved of Caleb and me, taken 2 weeks before he disappeared. She met him by the koi pond, her little legs swinging from the bench, looking far older than her 7 years. Hello, Dr. Foster, she said formally. I'm Zoe Hartley. You fixed my sister's head last month. I remember, he said, sitting beside her with careful distance between them. You have very distinctive eyes. Like yours. She said it simply, a fact. I found a picture of you with my mom, from before. The silence stretched between them. Later, Caleb would tell me he felt the world tilt in that moment, like stepping off solid ground into freefall. She cried for a whole year after you left, Zoe continued, her voice steady. Not in front of us, but at night. I could hear her. Maya couldn't. She sleeps like a rock. But I heard everything. Zoe, I'm not stupid. I can do math. We're 7. You've been gone 8 years. Mom says our dad died, but there's no grave to visit. No pictures except the one she hides. No last name to look up. She turned those green eyes on him fully. You're our father, aren't you? Caleb's hands were shaking. I know because Zoe told me later. Told me how he'd pressed them against his knees to make them stop. I don't remember, he whispered. I don't remember anything from before the accident, but when I look at you, at your sister, something in me recognizes something. Your mom knows, Zoe said quietly. She knows everything. That night, Caleb ordered a DNA test. Rush job, paid in cash, using hair samples Zoe had provided, hers, Maya's, and one she'd pulled from his lab coat when he'd hugged her goodbye. The results would take 3 days. 3 days before the truth became undeniable. 3 days before everything changed. But Rachel Bloom had been watching too. And she had her own secrets to protect. I was filing charts when I heard Rachel's voice from the supply closet, sharp and angry on a phone call she thought was private. The DNA results need to disappear. I don't care how much it costs. Yes, from the lab. No, he can't know. I've worked too hard for this. My hand froze on the filing cabinet. Through the crack under the door, I could see her pacing shadow. 8 years ago, you promised me, she continued. When Loretta came to me about the commitment papers, when I drew them up, you said he'd be mine eventually. I don't care if he's remembering. Those kids can't be proven as his. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Rachel hadn't just been Loretta's lawyer, she'd been her accomplice. The woman now wearing Caleb's engagement ring had helped lock him away, had helped steal him from us. I recorded the rest on my phone, my hands trembling as she outlined exactly how she'd manipulated the medical records, how she'd ensured Caleb's treatment continued long after it should have ended, how she'd positioned herself perfectly for his return. When she emerged from the closet, I was gone. But the recording wasn't. That evening, Caleb found me in the break room. His face was haunted, older somehow than just hours before. "The DNA results," he said quietly. "Someone tried to intercept them, but I had copies sent to 3 different locations." He pulled out a paper, hands shaking. 99.99% probability. They're mine. Zoe and Maya are my daughters. The sob that escaped me had been buried for 8 years. He reached for me, then stopped, his hand hovering between us. "Madison, I'm starting to remember things. Fragments, your laugh, a yellow apartment with sunflowers in the window, you telling me about a pregnancy test, but it's like looking through frosted glass. Your mother? I know." His voice was hollow. "I confronted her an hour ago. She admitted everything, the psychiatric facility, the drugs, the manipulation. Rachel was in on it from the beginning." The break room suddenly felt too small, the fluorescent lights too harsh. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done 8 years ago," he said, his jaw set with determination. I remembered. "Fight for my family if you'll let me." But first, he had a board meeting to attend and a wedding to cancel. The boardroom at Asheville Children's Hospital had never seen anything like it. Caleb had called an emergency meeting and the entire board was present, including Loretta in her wheelchair and Rachel in her designer suit, still wearing the engagement ring that now looked more like a shackle. I watched from the back with Zoe and Maya, who'd insisted on coming. "We deserve to see," Zoe had said with that quiet determination that reminded me so much of her father. Caleb stood at the head of the table, a laptop connected to the projection screen. "Board members, thank you for coming. I have something important to share regarding the leadership of this hospital and the Foster Foundation." Rachel shifted nervously. Loretta's face was marble. The first slide was the admission paperwork from the psychiatric facility. The second was the prescription log. The third was my recorded conversation with Rachel. Her voice filled the room, damning and clear. 8 years ago, you promised me, when Loretta came to me about the commitment papers." The board members' faces went from confusion to horror. Rachel stood, her face white. "This is taken out of context. Sit down." Caleb's voice was ice. Then, softer, he turned to the projection. The next slide was the DNA results. "These are my daughters, Zoe and Maya Hartley. For 8 years, they've grown up without their father because my mother and my fiancé—" He pulled off Rachel's ring from his pocket and set it on the table with a decisive click. "Decided I wasn't allowed to make my own choices." Loretta finally spoke, her voice regal even in defeat. "I did what was necessary to protect our family's reputation." "You stole my life," Caleb said quietly. "You stole their father. You stole time we'll never get back." The board voted immediately. Loretta was removed from her position, her membership revoked. Rachel was terminated and would face legal investigation. The Foster Foundation's leadership would transfer to a trust, specifically one set up for Zoe and Maya Hartley. As we left the boardroom, Loretta called out, "Caleb, please." He stopped but didn't turn. "We're done, Mother." "They're my granddaughters," she said, and for the first time her voice cracked. Maya, my brave, impulsive Maya, walked over to the wheelchair. She studied Loretta with those Foster green eyes. "You hurt our daddy. You hurt our mommy. That's not what grandmas do." Then she took Zoe's hand and they walked back to me, to us, to their father, who was crying openly now, not caring who saw. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of our living room, still just mine and the girls, though that was complicated now, watching Caleb help Maya with her math homework while Zoe read quietly beside them. He came by every day now, relearning how to be a father, relearning who he'd been before. His memories had returned in pieces, sometimes a flood, sometimes a trickle. The yellow apartment, my pregnancy announcement, his plans to propose. The morning he'd left for what should have been a quick trip to confront his mother, only to disappear for 8 years. "Madison," he'd said one evening, "I remember loving you. I remember it like a fact. The sky is blue, water is wet. I loved Madison Hartley, but I need to learn how to love you now, as we are, if you'll let me." I wasn't ready. Maybe I'd never be ready. Trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild easily. But watching him with our girls, seeing Zoe bloom under his attention, and Maya gain the father she'd always wanted, that was its own kind of healing. Loretta had died 2 months ago. The stroke had been massive, final. But she'd left one last surprise. Her entire estate, every penny of the foster fortune, went to Zoe and Maya. The letter that accompanied the will was brief. "I was wrong. Let them have what I took from their parents. Perhaps money can buy the time back. LF." It couldn't, of course. Nothing could give us back 8 years. But it could buy us future. College funds, a bigger house, therapy for all of us to untangle the mess of our past. "Mom," Maya called. "Dad says if I finish my homework, we can all go for ice cream." Dad. She'd started saying it naturally now, though Zoe still hesitated, still watched him like she was waiting for him to disappear again. "Ice cream sounds good," I said, entering the room. Caleb looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with at 26. Hopeful, brilliant, broken in places but trying to heal. He reached out his hand, not demanding, just offering. I took it. We weren't fixed. We weren't suddenly a perfect family. The silence between us was still there, filled with lost years and unspoken hurt. But silence, I was learning, could also be a space for new things to grow. "Let's start from here," he whispered, "just for me." And so we did. Not from the beginning, that was gone forever, but from the silence between us, where forgiveness might one day bloom.